Now, it's been more than a month since Russia has invaded Ukraine, and in that time, the world has watched as the country has been thrown into chaos. Impacts of Russia's war on Ukraine have been worldwide, even reaching us all the way here in New Mexico. Thanks for joining us today for Eye on New Mexico. This week, we are looking back at New Mexicans who have put their lives on hold to help those who have been derailed by war. We start the show with a Ukrainian priest who lives here in Albuquerque. I spoke to Father Artur before the invasion started. Tensions were high. Folks here in New Mexico who have family back in Ukraine were worried. In February, I sat down with Father Artur and spoke to him about how he grew up in Ukraine under the Soviet Union. But with the invasion looming, his family back in Ukraine was already thinking of escape plans before the Russian army crossed the border.
Father Artur Buvnovich has been serving as a priest for the Byzantine Catholic Church of America for the last 9 years. But before that, he grew up in the Soviet Union.
And when the Soviet Union fell apart, I thought that it would never come back. I really never even imagined something like that was coming back.
But when he first arrived in the United States, tensions back in Ukraine were already high.
At that time, I thought it was maybe good that I left Ukraine because it was kind of a mess. I left 3 months before the war started in the east of Ukraine. I left in the fall of 2013, and 3 months after there was strikes and riots in Kyiv.
9 years later, he says the divide in his homeland has grown.
Ukraine is divided. Russia's hand is into Ukraine, deep, very deep. And it was always my prayer that the life in Ukraine becomes better and the Ukrainian state becomes more democratic and more pro-Western.
Instead, Putin is pushing it in the opposite direction. In an hour-long speech Monday, Putin explained Ukraine was once a part of Russia, and now he's recognizing these separatist-controlled regions of Ukraine as independent and sent his troops into the country as peacekeepers.
I was like, wow, this is the language that is really troublesome. That was the red light for me.
As the threat of invasion continues, Father Artur is hoping for the best, but is prepared for the worst.
I still don't believe that we'll have a full-scale war. But if we have, I'm ready to go back and be there to defend the country.
So you would go back and fight for Ukraine, or?
I would. I would go back, yeah. If it comes to that, I would, yeah. It would be hard for me to stay here.
Then the day after that interview, Russia invaded. Father Artur hopped on the next plane going to Eastern Europe. His parents were able to make it out of Ukraine and met him in Hungary, just south of Budapest, where they are staying with family friends. His sister and her family stayed in Western Ukraine, and he says they are safe. Father Artur says it puts his mind at ease being with his family while all of this is happening. Now, while Father Artur was one of the first New Mexicans to make the trip to Ukraine when the Russian war started, he wasn't the last. At the beginning of March, our Brittany Costello talked with 2 men as they packed their bags headed to the front lines.
It is not their first mission, and saving people, it's what they do. But Dr. Christopher Hammond and Fire Inspector Roland Jones both acknowledge they're heading into the unknown, the bullseye for Russian troops, Ukraine's capital city of Kyiv.
No joke, I'm super scared. I'm definitely nervous about this. This is different than anything I've done.
Roland Jones is a fire inspector with the Santa Fe City Fire Department. Christopher Hammond is an emergency room physician in Los Alamos.
It's at my current stage of life. I don't know how to write policy. I don't know how to change governments. I don't have enough money to change the world, I feel like. And so what can I do is I can take the skill set that I have, really just to affect humanity on a really personal level.
They are adding that skill set to the Humanitarian Aid and Rescue Project, a group of highly trained emergency responders that goes to places others don't want to, this time with one goal, to help save and transport people who are trapped in Ukraine.
we're getting contacted by orphanages, by medical places. There's an overwhelming need for what we're going to be doing, and that's what we're doing.
Do you feel safe enough to go?
It's all relative, I think. When we were in Iraq, I learned that safety is relative.
Both Hammond and Jones served in other humanitarian efforts in Mosul, Iraq, Jones in Bangladesh. But this is a whole new challenge with a lot of things to figure out once they get there.
A lot of them don't have like food, water. They're seriously injured, so we got to kind of get to them pretty quickly, and then get them out from there.
If we see something that we need that we can help with, like we have a mission to go somewhere and do something, can we divert from that when things happen? Because things happen all over the place. So when there's a bombing of an apartment building, we can divert there and help extricate people and then provide medical care there, and then figure out, what I want to know is, where do we send those people and how do we get them to the next level of care?
Dr. Christopher Hammond and Fire Inspector Roland Jones left in early March, and a week after they landed in Ukraine, Brittany checked in on them to hear how their mission is going so far. Here's what they had to say.
There are moments of beauty. Open arms, welcome music for Ukrainians fleeing from violence.
Lviv is a very vibrant city right now. There's thousands of people walking the streets. Restaurants are all open, cafes are open, and Kyiv is like people stand in lines to get into the grocery store, and food is limited.
Los Alamos ER Dr. Chris Hammond and Santa Fe City firefighter Roland Jones are making the trek back and forth from Lviv in western Ukraine to Kyiv, the country's capital, bringing in aid while helping others get out.
It's kind of a nerve-wracking feeling going into a war.
Jones spent some of his time training local military, some heading into war for the first time.
I think it was kind of a comfort for them. I just walked them through, here's what you do if someone gets shot, in the chest, in the stomach, like how to pack wounds, how to treat people, how to put on tourniquets.
Jones and Hammond have a front row view of just how life-saving those lessons might be. And they're doing more than just saving lives. They're restoring humanity to people now in crisis, like this woman. Jones and Hammond went inside a bombed apartment building to help her clean up the glass and cover windows.
We were helping her clean her apartment, and she just keeps handing me gifts. Like, her house just was blown up, and she's handing me gifts. She offered me shampoo and conditioner 3 times, and I had a beanie on, and I kept telling her no, and finally a translator walked in, and she said she wants you to have the shampoo and conditioner, and I had to take my beanie off so that she would see my bald head, and then she understood, like, I don't have a need for this.
A reminder, these are people now in unimaginable territory.
She asked me if I would marry her and bring her back to the States. And so, it was a little piece of humanity in a place where it's chaotic.
That story, a sliver of light as they plan their next move with the Humanitarian Aid and Rescue Project.
The other half of our team is working to do, they're working with the government to do orphan rescues along some of the cities that are about to be overthrown. So we'll kind of be able to go up and into those and kind of extricate the kids before potentially the area is taken over. Knowing their work is far from over, sacrificing their own safety, time with their own family in New Mexico for the bigger picture. Hi, Sophia. Hi, Jade.
And I've got Emily, Sam, and Ashley, so love you guys.
Brittany Costello, KOB4.
I'm sure their families are very proud of them and miss them now. But now another New Mexican has left for the front lines. Kai Porter sat down with a Farmington teacher days before he packed his bags.
I just felt a big need to do it. There's women and children dying over there.
David Paget, a teacher at Piedra Vista High School in Farmington, plans to leave New Mexico on a dangerous journey Friday. He's traveling to Ukraine, where he'll help evacuate civilians from the war zone and treat the injured.
Are you worried about your own safety? How are you feeling?
Terrified, actually, to be honest with you. I think someone would be lying to you if they said that they weren't terrified, but I feel like if I go over there and if that happens, then hopefully I did my part and my kids will be proud of what I went over there and stood up for. with that said, I really hope I make it back.
Paget isn't just a high school teacher. He's an Army veteran. He served 8 years as a combat medic and did a tour in Kuwait.
I think it's prepared me to an extent. I think the situation and what's going on there is a different environment. It's more urban. And but as far as the treatment and the medical side, that's relatively the same.
Paget just quit his teaching job for the trip. He's also leaving his 20-year-old son and 16-year-old daughter behind. Despite the danger, David's son John says he's proud of what his dad's about to do.
It's definitely scary, but it's a good cause to fight for. And if you're going to do anything, this is a pretty dang good one to go out there and do your part for.
David says he'll be staying in Ukraine for about 6 months to a year, or until the war ends.
I think it's just the right thing to do. I think we need to stand up, and we always preach about freedom here. It's freedom everywhere in my eyes. And if I can go over and help a little bit, then I feel like I did my part.
That was Kai Porter reporting. As those men left their lives here in New Mexico to help out halfway across the world, not everyone can make that trip, but they still want to lend a helping hand. Coming up after the break, we talk to those who are helping Ukrainians while staying here in New Mexico. We'll be right back. This week on Eye on New Mexico, we are looking at how Russia's war in Ukraine is making impacts across the world, including here in the Land of Enchantment. Before the break, we heard from folks who dropped everything they had here and went over to Ukraine to help and be with family. And now we're going to hear from folks of what they can do through what they're doing every day. First, we head down south to Carlsbad, New Mexico, home of the famous Carlsbad Caverns and the Trinity Hotel. Our Alex Ross shows us how one local businessman is rallying his community to help those being rocked by war in Ukraine.
The war in Ukraine may seem a world away, but Johnny Chandler, who operates both the Trinity Hotel in Carlsbad and the Belzano family vineyard, says the invasion that is shaking Europe has spurred discussion among his customers.
There's not much that's being spoken about the last 3 or 4 weeks that's not related to what Russia's doing to Ukraine currently.
Both the Trinity Hotel and Belzano family vineyard will do their part to help the millions of refugees pouring out of Ukraine and into neighboring countries. On Saturday, all money from items purchased at either the hotel, restaurant, or vineyard will be donated to World Central Kitchen, which is raising funds to feed Ukrainian refugees. TripAdvisor, the online travel company, will match each donation. Chandler says the fundraising push is part of a worldwide effort by restaurants to provide food to Ukrainians and is a way to show opposition to Russia's invasion.
There's not much that's being spoken about the last 3 or 4 weeks that's not related to what Russia's doing to Ukraine currently.
Tony Belzano, who helps operate the vineyard, says since the war began, the hotel has raised more than $5,000 for World Central Kitchen through the sale of desserts. Belzano says they are just doing their part to help ease the suffering.
It's just one tiny little thing that we can do to help them, and we hope that it does.
In Carlsbad, Alex Ross, KOB4.
Now, all proceeds will be donated to the World Central Kitchen, so if you aren't going down to Carlsbad anytime soon but still want to help, you can make a donation directly online at WCK.org. Well, back up here in the metro, our Julie Frendak sat down with one Ukrainian woman who's called New Mexico home since 2010. But now Larissa Castillo is trying to support her people in her home country from thousands of miles away. People like her mom, who's still in Ukraine trying to get to the Poland border.
The sign is simple: stop war. It's Larissa Castillo's only wish right now.
Stressful, painful, tearful. I'm full of tears right now. It's hard to hold them.
That's how she's felt for weeks now, as she's watched her home country of Ukraine become destroyed by war.
What we're facing right now, it's a brutal attack on a peaceful nation.
Her mother and some of her relatives live about 20 kilometers south of the capital city of Kyiv. Their city has been bombed since Russia's initial attack.
Our faces burning from tears because they never dry. It's devastating to see what's going on.
Some of her families trying to find refuge at Poland's border, while others stayed back to fight in the civilian defense.
Our soldiers are so brave. They will defend their country to the last breath.
Castillo moved to New Mexico in 2010, but says Ukraine will always feel like her true home.
Even we live here, but our loyalty, our love, always been with Ukraine. It's our people, our country.
She wears a vyshyvanka, the name for a traditional Ukrainian blouse, with great pride these days.
With heart full of pain, but heart full of pride and loyalty to my country. It's my second skin, it's my protection, and it's the way for me to show my support, because everything has meaning. The border, the sleeves, and the collar, everything makes sense because it's protection from the evil spirit.
She's doing whatever she can to support her family and other refugees, like collecting donations through her local organization, Ukrainian Americans of New Mexico. They've already filled more than a dozen boxes that will go to refugee zones.
He's stronger with army, but we're stronger in our spirits, in our hearts.
She just asks for one thing from her New Mexican neighbors.
God on the Ukrainian side, and God will protect us. And we ask everyone, continue to pray. Please don't stop.
The Ukrainian Americans of New Mexico organization is still collecting donations to support refugee zones in the civil defense in Ukraine. They're asking for medical supplies like over-the-counter medicine, bandages, and first aid kits. They're also asking for other supplies for soldiers like sleeping bags, clothes, and cell phones. If you have any questions about the donation list, call Luda Kosaf at 505-355-9216 or find more information on donation drop-offs on the Ukrainian Americans of New Mexico's Facebook page. Now, that's just a few ways you could help support Ukraine right here in New Mexico, but there's also a lot of multiple international organizations that are also collecting donations for war relief. But a donation cannot always replace what was lost. After the break, we will hear from those who have lost loved ones in the attacks on Ukraine. We'll be right back. One Albuquerque native, James Wish, has been teaching in the Ukraine capital of Kyiv for 2.5 years. But when the invasion started, he was forced to flee along with millions of others. Now his students are the ones who are on the front lines. Our Julie Frendak spoke to him via Zoom as he and his family are now safe in southern Ukraine.
James Wish traded Albuquerque for Kiev, Ukraine 2.5 years ago. He's been teaching English and IT classes to Ukrainian professionals like Bogdan Borodai. But Bogdan is no longer just a student. He's now also a freedom fighter.
We have a few frag grenades, high explosive grenades, and cocktails. Yeah, we made like hundreds of them.
Bogdan is in an army of 20 to 30 men defending their village 15 kilometers from Kiev.
Our village is cut off with the connections from all the rest, from armed forces, from other villages. So we coordinate ourselves.
Bogdan says he woke up last Thursday morning to the sound of missiles. The Russians were attacking key military and infrastructure targets in Kiev. But now those targets have expanded.
They bombed by the aircraft means my kindergarten. My grandma was hiding like 300 feet away from that kindergarten in our basement.
But those ruthless attacks have only strengthened their will to fight.
No other things united Ukrainians as much as Putin. We united as never been before. I mean, people are helping each other, and as the war goes on, we see positive dynamics. We stand for our country, we stand for our nation, and surely we will win because all the world with us.
James is trying to lend as much support as possible from the safety of his new wife's parents' home in southern Ukraine.
My original plan was to get her down here with her parents out of harm's way and then go back up to Kyiv and fight my way back up to Kyiv and help Bogdan and whoever I could help.
But COVID has sidelined him, so he has time to reflect on how quickly things changed and how the city he's grown to love has become a war zone.
I'm very afraid for my student and my friend Bogdan. because he and many others in these isolated villages, suburbs around Kyiv, they are cut off.
But he also knows their resolve is unbreakable right now.
Ukraine has 40 million people, okay? And they are all pissed off. If they don't have Molotov cocktails, they'll use their teeth and their fingernails. That's how angry they are about this situation.
Both James and Bogdan have a very specific request for Western organizations.
NATO is going to have to create a no-fly zone over Ukraine. I know they don't want to do it, but it's going to have to happen.
So please, ask your president, ask NATO to close the sky, please.
A plea from the boots on the ground as the reality of war and potentially making the ultimate sacrifice sets in.
It's something unusual for the first days, but then it's just like something you live with.
While James is safe in Ukraine, his family still here in Albuquerque has some serious concerns about what could happen to him while the war rages on. We also spoke to James's former partner, who has been organizing anti-war protests here in New Mexico, but she never thought she would be this close to the conflict. She adds it's been hard to send James money because cash is scarce over there. While she is hoping for the best outcome for James and his family, she's also had a flood of different emotions throughout this whole process.
Having to have really real thoughts about what if this is the end, you know, and kind of planning and deciding my actions based on if this is the last conversation I ever have with him, am I going to be okay? You know, if this is the last time his kids talk to him, are they going to be able to move forward and know that they said everything that they needed to?
Having those conversations can't be easy, but it unfortunately is a reality for several New Mexican families as the violence in Ukraine continues to impact people right here in the metro. Our Tommy Lopez spoke to a man right here in Albuquerque who's mourning a family member, his childhood home, and the way of his family's life. Dr. Alexei Kolskov runs a dentist office here in the East Mountains, and his family has been sending back these pictures showing his childhood home completely destroyed by a Russian missile, and that missile also killed his uncle.
Dr. Alexei Kozlov is devastated.
When I've learned about my home country, Ukraine, being attacked, it's just a gut-wrenching experience.
He says Friday of last week, a Russian attack injured many and killed his uncle, who is a deacon in the city of Zaporozhye and was helping others survive the conflict.
Our world just stopped at the magnitude and the reality that one day Ukraine can have this kind of a conflict. It's like a bad dream.
He says the atrocities in his home country likely are not over.
Of course, because what's intentionally the Russian army, it seems like they're targeting civilians.
Dr. Kozlov came to America in the 90s, and he's been in New Mexico for about 4 years.
When the patient comes in and they need a crown, this is the only...
He says just speaking in front of cameras could put his life in danger. He believes it's very possible that Russian-backed operatives could kill people like him for speaking out, even in America. And dangerous situations, unfortunately, are something that he says he's seen before, growing up just an hour away from Chernobyl, where he says that power plant disaster in the 80s later killed his father.
We are blessed to be in East Mountains community.
Now he's urging people worldwide to show even more support for Ukraine, pushing governments to impose more sanctions on Russia and donate if they can. His village, for example, hasn't had water in 2 weeks.
We're praying for them, and we were learning that they're much stronger than we thought. They're very resilient.
Dr. Kozlov was a missionary in Russia about 15 years ago, and he says it's haunting to think that he was helping the very kids who possibly grew up to carry out these deadly attacks. And watching the coverage of the war, he says he is most concerned about the misinformation Russia has been putting out. He says a lot of Russian civilians he knew have been reaching out to him, saying they believe their country isn't killing anyone, and he's spreading awareness about this misinformation is very important to him. As the war in Ukraine rages on, folks here in New Mexico are continuing to lend a hand, and many are asking for your help. If you want to make a donation, we have links over at KOB.com. Thanks again for watching, and we'll be back next weekend with another Eye on New Mexico.